The video game industry counts millions of projects, from simple arcade titles to massive blockbusters, but among them there is a special category of games, the kind that never show up on big gaming expos, that rarely appear in official reviews, games whose origins are often unclear, and whose very purpose raises more questions than answers. Some of them scare you with atmosphere, others break all the familiar rules of genre, and a few leave you with the feeling that you have seen something you were never supposed to see. These projects exist on the border between art, experiment, and nightmare, and sometimes they cross that line completely. In this iceberg, we will descend step by step, going deeper and deeper as we explore the most disturbing, strange, and dangerous games in history. And the lower we go, the less space will be left between fictional horror and real life. Welcome to the iceberg of disturbing games. Level 1. The Amnesia series is a benchmark of psychological horror. There is no room here for endless shooting or heroic power fantasies, only cold fear, helplessness, and constant pressure from the unknown. The first game, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, was released in 2010. The story takes place in 1839. The main character, Daniel, wakes up in a gloomy, half-lit castle and remembers nothing but his own name. Wandering through long stone corridors, he slowly restores his memory and learns about an ancient artifact found during an expedition to Algeria and about the curse he brought back with him. Here, light is your best friend, and darkness is not just a backdrop. It is a threat that can strip you of your sanity. In 2013, the second game came out, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs. This time the action moves to London at the dawn of the 20th century. A new protagonist, Oswald Mandis, wakes up from a violent fever and hears the screams of his children. Searching for them, he descends into a gigantic machine, a monstrous mechanism built supposedly to save humanity at the cost of countless lives. In 2020, the series received another sequel, Amnesia: Rebirth. The year is 1937, the Algerian desert. The heroine, Tassi Trianon, regains consciousness in an abandoned camp in the middle of the sands. Her companions are gone, and on the horizon something lurks that clearly does not belong to this world. Finally, in 2023, Amnesia: The Bunker was released. World War I, a French soldier finds himself trapped in a partially destroyed bunker filled with darkness, cramped passages, and something hunting him in the shadows. There are no long scripted cutscenes here to hold your hand. Survival depends entirely on the player. Each Amnesia game does more than just scare you. It plays with perception, forcing you to question what is real and what is simply the product of a mind falling apart. This is not horror for those who just want a few cheap jump scares. It is a slow, suffocating descent into a nightmare you cannot wake up from. BioShock. BioShock is not just a horror game or a shooter, it is a full-blown philosophical parable disguised as a video game. Each entry takes us to a unique city built on grand ideas and destroyed by very human flaws. The first game, released in 2007, begins in 1960. After a plane crash, the protagonist, Jack, finds himself in the underwater city of Rapture. This retro-futuristic marvel of engineering was created as a utopia for the chosen few. By the time the player arrives, it is already in ruins. A brutal civil war fueled by a hunger for power and the reckless use of plasmids, a drug that grants superpowers, has left the city populated only by madmen and mutants. In 2010, BioShock 2 followed, set in 1968. This time you play as a Big Daddy, a giant figure in a diving suit whose mission is tied to protecting little sisters, children who extract a rare substance called Adam from corpses. In 2013, the series rose into the sky. BioShock Infinite took us to Columbia, a floating city in the clouds, and a so-called technological utopia. The main character, Booker DeWitt, must find a girl named Elizabeth, but the deeper he dives into Columbia's history, the clearer it becomes that behind the patriotic slogans and religious fanaticism lie cruelty and dark secrets. BioShock is famous not only for its atmosphere and plot, but also for how masterfully it weaves philosophical questions into the gameplay. It is a story about how ideals crumble when they collide with human nature, and how sometimes the scariest monster is not a mutated beast, but a human being with a dream. Bendy and the Ink Machine. Bendy and the Ink Machine is an indie horror game that feels like the nightmare version of an old animation studio. The game was released episodically from February 2017 to October 2018, slowly revealing its strange and haunting story. The protagonist is Henry Stein, a former animator from the 1930s. Many years later, he receives a letter from his old business partner, Joey Drew, inviting him back to the studio. But instead of nostalgia, Henry finds empty hallways, scattered film reels, and a mysterious ink machine capable of bringing cartoon characters to life. The problem is the characters that come back are nothing like the ones he remembers. Instead of cheerful, hand drawn mascots, he encounters aggressive, twisted ink monsters. Among them is Bendy himself, once the happy face of the studio, now a terrifying creature that stalks the player through dark corridors. The game quickly became a cult classic thanks to its retro aesthetics, eerie atmosphere, and the feeling that you are slowly uncovering the dark secrets of your own past. In 2022, the story continued with Bendy and the Dark Revival, and several standalone projects have expanded the universe even further. Telltale's The Walking Dead. Telltales. The Walking Dead is not just a game, it is an interactive survival drama where every line of dialogue and every decision can cost someone their life. Telltale Games released it episodically from April 2012 to March 2019 across 4 seasons. The central figure of the whole story is a girl named Clementine. We watch her grow up and change against the backdrop of a zombie apocalypse. In the first season, the player controls Lee Everett, who finds Clementine at the very beginning of the outbreak and becomes her mentor and protector. Their journey is a constant search for safety and a struggle to hold on to their humanity in a world where humanity is almost gone. In the second season, you play as Clementine herself. She has already lost nearly everyone close to her and is forced to rely only on herself as she meets new people and tries to decide who can be trusted. The third season, A New Frontier, tells the story of Javier Garcia, a man trying to protect his family. Clementine appears as an experienced survivor with her own mission to find a boy named AJ. In the fourth and final season, Clementine once again becomes the main playable character. Together with AJ, she finds a group of children trying to survive in an abandoned school and takes on the role of their protector. The series earned praise for its emotional depth, comic book art style, and heavy moral choices that leave the player feeling that there may be no such thing as a right decision. Little Nightmares. Little Nightmares is a horror platformer where fear comes not from loud jump scares, but from helplessness and a warped version of reality. The game was released in April 2017 under Bandai Namco and immediately drew attention for its atmosphere. The main character is a girl named Six. She wakes up aboard the Maw, a massive iron vessel inhabited by grotesque, disproportionate humanoid creatures. These monsters hunt Six, and a single mistake can be fatal. The game masterfully conveys the feeling that you are tiny and defenseless. Corridors stretch on endlessly, and the hulking enemies loom over the heroine like living mountains. Your only weapons are agility and the ability to hide in the shadows. Throughout 2017 to 2018, additional chapters expanded the story, and in 2021, a prequel, Little Nightmares 2, was released. This time, players control a boy named Mono, assisted by Six, as they try to escape a world full of distorted beings and absurd locations. Little Nightmares 3 is currently in development and is expected to continue that unsettling journey. Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead is a co-op first-person shooter where survival depends not only on your skills, but also on how well your team works together. The first game came out in November 2008, followed by Left 4 Dead 2 just a year later. Both were developed by Valve, the studio behind Half-Life and Portal. At the core of the story are four random survivors caught in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Together, they must make their way through a series of campaigns, each one a separate episode with unique locations and a final mad dash toward rescue. The main feature of Left 4 Dead is the AI Director, a system that dynamically changes enemy spawns, item locations, and events depending on how the team is doing. In one playthrough, you might breeze through an area almost calmly, while in another, you'll be thrown into a brutal meat grinder with infected swarming from every direction. Left 4 Dead 2 expanded on everything that worked in the first game: more campaigns, more enemy types, more weapons and modes. It became a cult classic in the co op community, and Valve kept updating it for years, keeping the game alive long after release. Limbo. Limbo is a minimalist yet incredibly atmospheric puzzle platformer that became iconic in the indie scene. It was released in 2010 and immediately stood out for its black and white visuals and impressive silence. The developer is the Danish studio Playdead. The story is told without words. The player controls an unnamed boy who wakes up in a dark forest and sets out to find his sister. Along the way, he encounters deadly traps, hostile figures, and a monstrous spider that became one of the game's most recognizable images. There is no HUD in Limbo, no direct tutorials, no explicit explanations. All your attention is focused on moving forward through danger and mystery. Death here is a core mechanic. You will die often just to understand how to overcome the next obstacle. The sound design amplifies the mood: creaking branches, distant footsteps, the quiet rush of wind. It all creates the impression that beyond the edge of the screen lies an entire world full of unseen threats. In 2016, Playdead released Limbo's spiritual successor, Inside, which took the same core concept and pushed it into an even darker, more unsettling direction. Baldi's Basics. Baldi's Basics is a parody of old 90s educational computer games that unexpectedly turned into one of the strangest and creepiest indie horror titles. It was developed by Micah McGonigal and released in March 2018. At first glance, it looks like a primitive learning program. You play as a student who has to collect 7 notebooks by solving simple math problems. But the moment you make a mistake, everything changes. The teacher, Baldi, starts to get angry and begins to hunt you down with a ruler in his hand. As you progress, Baldi becomes faster and more aggressive. On your way, you meet other characters. Some help, some interfere. The visuals are intentionally crude, reminiscent of cheap old educational software running on a school PC, and that cheapness actually makes things feel more disturbing. The joke look of Baldi's Basics quickly misled players. Beneath the silly surface is a tense survival experience where mistakes in class can cost you far more than a bad grade. The game became a viral meme, spawned countless fan mods, and even got expanded editions. But at its core, it always remains the same: absurdity that suddenly morphs into a real nightmare.
American McGee's Alice.
American McGee's Alice is a twisted reimagining of Lewis Carroll's classic Alice in Wonderland, done in a dark, psychologically fractured style. It was released for PC in the early 2000s and immediately stood out for its mood and visuals. In this version, Alice has survived a terrible tragedy, a fire that killed her family. She ends up in a psychiatric hospital, completely absorbed in her own imaginary Wonderland. Only now, Wonderland is a warped, nightmarish reflection of her trauma and fear. Alice's main goal is to defeat the evil Red Queen and restore her sanity. Along the way, familiar characters appear in terrifying forms. The Cheshire Cat is a skinny, scarred creature with a razor-sharp grin. The Mad Hatter has become a deranged inventor. The White Rabbit is a nervous, exhausted guide. Gameplay combines platforming and combat with a visual style rooted in dark, Gothic, and Victorian aesthetics. A haunting soundtrack deepens the sense of madness. The game became a cult favorite and in 2011 received a sequel, Alice Madness Returns, which explores psychological trauma and fractured reality even further. STALKER. The STALKER series created by Ukrainian studio GSC Game World, mixes shooter mechanics, survival horror, and RPG elements. The action takes place in an alternate version of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where 20 years after the 1986 disaster, a second, even more devastating event occurs. This new catastrophe has changed reality itself. The zone is filled with anomalies, patches of space that can kill you instantly, and strange artifacts that possess unusual properties. On top of that, the area is crawling with mutants and hostile factions. You play as a stalker, someone who willingly risked their life entering the zone in search of artifacts, answers, or personal goals. The plots intertwine conspiracies, mysticism, and the gritty everyday life of people living on the edge of civilization and the unknown. The first game, Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, was released in 2007 and quickly became a cult classic. It was followed by Clear Sky in 2008 and Call of Pripyat in 2009. Each entry reveals new sides of life in the zone and shows it from different perspectives. The series is famous for its atmosphere: gloomy landscapes, abandoned buildings, whistling wind, distant gunshots, and the constant feeling that something is watching you. These are games where fear and curiosity are tightly intertwined, and danger can come from anywhere: an anomaly, a mutant, or another human. Level 2, The Forest. The Forest is a survival game where the familiar setup of crash on a deserted island quickly turns into something much darker. Developed by Night Games, it officially released in 2018 after several years in early access. The story begins with a plane crash. The main character survives, but his son is taken right from the crash site. Exploring the island, the player soon realizes it is far from uninhabited. It is home to aggressive, mutated cannibals who hunt any outsider. The gameplay revolves around gathering resources, building shelter, and exploring a network of underground caves that hold the key to the island's secrets. It is in those caves that the horror fully unfolds: narrow passages, suffocating darkness, echoing footsteps, and disturbing silhouettes flickering in the torchlight. The forest balances freedom and pressure. You can hunt, build, and expand your camp, but at any moment calm can shatter into chaos when enemies attack your base or begin tracking you across the map. In 2023, the sequel Sons of the Forest expanded the world, added new mechanics, and deepened the story. But the core feeling of unease and constant threat remains. Welcome to the Game. Welcome to the Game is an indie horror title that sends the player into one of the darkest corners of the internet, the darknet. It was released in 2016 by Reflect Studios. Your goal is to find a so-called Red Room, a live-streamed torture and murder broadcast. To do that, you must piece together fragments of a URL, hiding behind layers of anonymity and trying not to be traced. At first, everything happens on the screen of a computer in the protagonist's apartment, but the further you dig, the more terrifying it gets, and it soon becomes clear that the danger isn't just online. Someone can come for you in real life. You have to watch your surroundings, close windows, check the doors, and freeze at the slightest suspicious sound. The game doesn't limit itself to virtual threats. A mistake in your digital defenses or in your vigilance can end with you being kidnapped right from your own home. That constant tension creates a feeling that while you're hunting forbidden content, you could easily end up as content yourself. In 2018, Welcome to the Game 2 took things even further. It expanded the map, added new enemies, and made the experience even more stressful. Now, danger waits not only at home, but also on the city streets. One Chance. One Chance is an unusual Flash game that appeared on Newgrounds in 2010. It was created by Dean Moynihan. At first, it sounds like a heroic story. Scientists find a cure for cancer, but things go horribly wrong. The drug begins to attack not only cancer cells, but healthy tissue as well. The cure turns into a new plague. Humanity is facing extinction, and there are only a few days left. The player's sole objective is to somehow create an antidote before it is too late. The mechanics are simple. You choose how to spend each day, whom to talk to, what to work on. The game has multiple endings, but with one key twist. Whatever you get the first time, you cannot honestly replay it on the same device or browser. That's not a bug, it's the entire point. The game saves your progress in a way that blocks a restart. And of course, you can cheat by changing computers or wiping data, but doing that kills the message. One chance essentially tells you every decision is final. It forces you to live with the consequences, just like in real life, where there might not be a second try. The Long Dark. The Long Dark is a harsh survival sim set in the Canadian wilderness. It was developed by Hinterland Studio and launched in early access in 2014. There are no zombies, mutants, or classic monsters here. The main enemy is nature itself. The story starts after a mysterious geomagnetic event throws the world into chaos. No electricity, dead technology, collapsing civilization. You are a pilot whose plane crashes in the middle of a frozen nowhere. All you have now is cold, hunger, wild animals, and endless snow. You must plan every step, find food, search for shelter, maintain warmth, and manage your energy. A single mistake can be fatal. A blizzard, a bear encounter, or a poorly judged route. The Long Dark stands out for its quiet, heavy sense of isolation. There is no constant action, only slow, drawn out survival where days seem endless and every night feels like a test of willpower. Outside LSD Dream Emulator. LSD Dream Emulator is one of the strangest and most mysterious games of the late 90s. Released in 1998 exclusively in Japan for the PlayStation, it quickly became a cult classic among fans of surrealism. You find yourself inside a sequence of dreams, each lasting only a few minutes. There are no traditional objectives, quests, or enemies. You simply wander through surreal spaces, city streets, deserts, abstract tunnels, psychedelic patterns, absurd landscapes. It feels like a continuous stream of consciousness where scenes shift without warning. The main feature is its dream logic. If you bump into an object or character, the game instantly transports you somewhere else. Sometimes the transitions feel harmless, other times they're deeply unsettling. Among all the bizarre imagery, one figure stands out: the Shadow Man, a dark humanoid shape that can appear in some dreams. If you encounter him, he wipes your stored progress, adding another layer of anxiety to an already uneasy experience. So, what remains of Edith Finch? What Remains of Edith Finch is an interactive narrative exploration game released in 2017 by Giant Sparrow with Annapurna Interactive. At first glance, it looks like a beautiful walk through an old family house, but behind its walls lie the stories of an entire family seemingly cursed by tragedy. You play as Edith Finch, the last surviving member of the Finch family. She returns to the old estate to piece together what happened to each of her relatives. The house is more than a backdrop, it is a physical family tree. Each room belongs to one family member and is frozen in time like a capsule of memories. Exploring these spaces, you enter self contained mini stories from playful childhood fantasies to grim accidents. Almost every story ends with the character's death. The way these episodes are presented is incredibly varied. Sometimes you see the world through the eyes of a child, other times you slip into the mind of someone disconnected from reality. Despite its dark subject matter, What Remains of Edith Finch isn't a horror game in the traditional sense. There are no monsters except the ones woven into human lives. It leaves you with a quiet sense of sadness and a subtle horror in the face of inevitability. Sometimes the scariest monster you have to face is simply life itself, yet inside.
Inside is the spiritual successor to Limbo, created by the same Danish studio Playdead. Released in 2016, it refines the ideas of minimal storytelling and dark visual design to near perfection.
Once again, the plot is told without words. You control an unnamed boy running through a hostile, uncanny world. Around him are gray landscapes, gloomy forests, industrial zones, and laboratories. Everything feels wrong. Armed guards sweep the area, twisted creatures lurk in the shadows, and faceless crowds obey mysterious commands. The strength of Inside lies in its detail and symbolism. There are no explicit explanations, but nearly every piece of the environment invites questions. Who rules this place? Why are people stripped of their will? What happened before we got here? Gameplay mixes platforming, puzzles, and stealth, with plenty of moments where you must hide and hold your breath to avoid pursuit or death. The game's final act has become one of the most discussed and shocking sequences in indie gaming. Inside is a story you can interpret dozens of different ways, but one thing is clear: this world is cold, indifferent, and dangerous. And sometimes the only way to survive is simply to keep moving. The Theater. The Theater is a game born not in a studio, but in internet folklore. Its story began as an early 2010s creepypasta about a supposedly lost horror game from the mid 90s. The premise is extremely simple. You enter a movie theater, walk up to the ticket clerk, hand over your ticket, and walk down a dark hallway. The screen fades to black, and then you find yourself at the entrance again, facing the same clerk. The cycle repeats. At first, it feels like a bug or some strange art project, but with each new run, oddities start to appear: glitches, distorted movie posters, incoherent phrases, strange sounds. The environments become more surreal and oppressive. Corridors stretch longer and darker. The visuals are fake retro, low resolution, rough textures, like a forgotten PC game from decades ago. It feels as if you're playing something dredged up from someone else's past, something you were never meant to find. Over time, the theater has inspired fan recreations, mods, and countless explainer videos, but no one has ever definitively proved that an original version actually existed. Maybe it's just a campfire story, or maybe someone really did once launch this endless cyclical nightmare. Darkwood. Darkwood is an unusual top-down survival horror game developed by Polish studio Acid Wizard. It entered early access in 2014 and fully released on PC in 2017, later coming to consoles as well. The story is set in a vaguely defined Eastern European or post-Soviet region swallowed by a mysterious forest. This forest is alive, it grows, shifts, and seems to pull everything into itself. Escaping it is impossible, and the longer you stay, the more it warps, turning into a waking nightmare. By day, you explore, scavenge for supplies, trade, fortify your shelter, and try to understand what happened to the other survivors. But the real test begins at night. Darkness falls, and with it come creatures and bizarre phenomena. To see the dawn, you must barricade doors, set traps, control lights, and listen carefully to every sound around you. Darkwood is notable for its refusal to rely on cheap jump scares. Instead, the game slowly immerses you in a suffocating sense of dread. The forest reveals its secrets reluctantly, and each new item or conversation hints at something much darker beneath the surface. Safety is always temporary, and sometimes the silence between events is far more unsettling than any scream. Vapor. Vapor is an experimental horror game released in 2015. It tells the story of a sorcerer who, after torture and execution, is cast into a kind of purgatory. Now he must fight his way through strange hostile lands to return to the world of the living and take revenge on his executioners. The narrative is fragmented, the focus is on atmosphere. The locations feel like fever dreams: fog, shimmering skies, twisted landscapes, and ancient structures. It is easy to lose your bearings here, and every encounter with enemies feels like facing something ancient and deeply malevolent. Visually, Vapor blends dark fantasy with psychedelic art design. Bright neon effects sit alongside near Gothic environments, creating the sense of an alien world where you are clearly unwelcome. Unfortunately, the game is infamous for its technical issues, bugs, instability, rough optimization, which left it with only a handful of positive reviews. Still, it maintains a kind of cult status as a strange, flawed experiment that some players can't quite forget. Uh, Worlds.com Worlds.com is one of the earliest 3D online chat environments launched in 1995 by Worlds Incorporated. Technically, it's not a horror game, but for many who returned to it years later, it felt oddly unsettling, like wandering through an abandoned virtual city. You create an avatar and move through 3D spaces, chatting with other users. Everything looks like a relic of early 3D, blocky models, odd textures, empty rooms. That crudeness makes it feel like a forgotten place where time stopped a long time ago. Over the years, darker stories grew around Worlds.com. Rumors spread online about a so called Saturn cult allegedly operating inside the virtual world, harassing players, extorting them, and even threatening them outside the game. One particularly infamous figure is Nexialist, a tall, disturbing avatar said to teleport people to empty, inescapable maps. Today, Worlds.com feels like a museum of the early internet, but behind its naive graphics, there's this eerie sensation that you're walking through a digital ghost town and that anyone you meet there could be absolutely anyone. Carmageddon. Carmageddon is a notorious vehicular combat racer released in 1997 by British studio Stainless Games. Originally, it was meant to be a licensed Mad Max game, but when the license fell through, the developers took inspiration from the film Death Race 2000 and created their own twisted universe. On the surface, it's a race against the clock, but there are 3 ways to win: finish first, destroy all opponents, or run over every pedestrian on the map. That last option is what landed Carmageddon at the center of international controversy. In many countries, the game faced bans or heavy censorship. Some versions replaced people with zombies or robots to bypass ratings restrictions. The gameplay encourages chaos and destruction. Streets and industrial yards become arenas for vehicular battles, and your car itself is a weapon. You can ram enemies, crush their vehicles, and send them flying into flaming wreckage. And despite or because of the criticism, Carmageddon became a cult classic and spawned sequels, remakes, and remasters. It remains a symbol of that era when games openly tried to push boundaries and test how much violent content society was willing to accept. Level 3, Tomato Way. Tomato Way is one of the strangest and most absurd first-person shooters out there. Released in December 2016 by Vladimir Casilio Gonzalez, a name that itself has become a bit of a meme among players. You play as a tomato, literally. Your character is an anthropomorphic vegetable with eyes, arms, and weapons, going on missions to fight monsters for money. The levels are surreal, with intentionally crude graphics that make everything feel like a bizarre fever dream. The gameplay mixes shooting with melee combat. Enemies look like something pulled out of old cartoons and run through a horror filter. The mood constantly swings between ridiculous and unsettling. You feel like you're supposed to laugh, but the sheer weirdness and abrasive visuals create a low-grade discomfort instead. Tomato Way received mixed reviews, but built a small cult following precisely because of how unapologetically strange it is. It's one of those games where you're never quite sure whether you're playing a joke, an art project, or just a very, very weird shooter made with zero regard for convention. Cosmology of Kyoto. Cosmology of Kyoto is a rare, ominous game by Japanese studio Softhedge, released in the 1990s. The story takes place in 10th century Japan. You create a character, name, gender, appearance, and appear naked in a field outside Kyoto. Nearby lies a desiccated corpse whose clothes you must take to even begin your journey. The half-ruined Kyoto you enter is a bleak place full of demons, beggars, and madness. Your ultimate goal is spiritual enlightenment through Buddhism, but the road there is paved with suffering, death, and rebirth. When your character dies, they pass through a kind of purgatory, endure torment, then reincarnate in a new body, and can even find their previous corpse. What makes Cosmology of Kyoto unique is how it fuses real history, mythology, and religion. Almost every element comes with an explanation or reference: objects, characters, events. It's not just a game, but an interactive textbook on some of the darkest corners of Japanese history. And the visuals are abstract and disturbing, like moving paintings of pain and despair. Grotesque imagery and warped anatomy create a constant sense of unease. Minimalist, oppressive sound design and Japanese voiceover push the atmosphere even further. The interface is a point and click system with occasional typed commands. Sometimes you literally need to type yes or no. You also have to remember your character's name. It functions as your save password. Cosmology of Kyoto doesn't rely on jump scares, but it leaves a deep impression of hopelessness and decay. It's a game for those who want a heavy, philosophical, and aesthetically minimal experience. Uninvited. Uninvited is a classic point and click adventure with horror elements, released in 1986. It was originally developed by ICOM Simulations for Macintosh computers and later ported to other platforms, including the NES. The story begins with a car crash. The protagonist wakes up on an empty road, their brother or sister, depending on the version, missing. The only clue is a looming, eerie mansion nearby, and that's where you have to go. The house is full of puzzles, locks, traps, and sinister residents, ghosts, zombies, hellhounds, and other supernatural beings. To save your relative, you must explore every corner, solve logic puzzles, and avoid instant death situations. Uninvited uses a text command system and static screens for each room, a recognizable style of 80s adventure games. Behind the dated visuals, there is a surprisingly tense atmosphere. You never quite know what's waiting behind the next door. Free Ice Cream. Free Ice Cream is a short flash point and click adventure that appeared on Newgrounds in 2009. At first, it looks like a lighthearted pixel art story, but its plot is anything but cheerful. You control two little girls who are lured in by a deranged ice cream man. After being kidnapped, they wake up in his house, and their only goal is to escape before he comes back to kill them. Gameplay follows the traditional point and click formula: explore rooms, find and use items, solve puzzles. Despite its cartoony look, the game is very tense. Every room feels like it could be hiding a threat, and you always feel like time is running out. What makes Free Ice Cream especially disturbing is that its scenario isn't pure fantasy. It is the kind of nightmare that could, in theory, happen in real life. That contrast between simple visuals and grim subject matter makes the game genuinely unsettling.
Lone Survivor.
Lone Survivor is a 2D psychological survival horror game released in 2012 by Superflat Games.